The state takes a position that, frankly, because if the court does allow this witness, we wouldn't want to create any kind of a surprise or issues. We would ask the court and urge the court to consider letting the state simply introduce what has always been disclosed, which is still consistent with um, uh, what her apparent truth is, and that is that Tammy at a lunch with Ms. Olson, um, we won't inquire as to whether others were present, raise the issue. My husband wants me to up the insurance. The question was asked to her, well, why? And she said, as I approach retirement, he just wants me to up the insurance. Now, I'm sorry, I need to go back on the proffer. There was one additional thing she said. She did say, and I don't want to speak for her, but given the context of the disclosure she made this morning, she said she'd listened to Emma's testimony. She said that actually, when they all sat down, the ladies did, they all sat down and filled out the life insurance applications together because she says that's kind of the normal sign-up process. So she said everybody did that together. So in fairness, I do have to disclose that that was part of what she told me this morning. The state, nonetheless, is still seeking to call her to simply testify that she had lunch with Tammy. Tammy said, my husband wants me to up the insurance, and upon explanation, he wants me to up it as I approach retirement. Those particulars of the statement have always been disclosed to the defense. That interview occurred in May of 2020 by Detective Mattingly. It was recorded by audio as well as included in a written report. So to that extent, the defense has always had that available to them. We do understand the issues of the additional information, but we feel like that issue can simply be cured by an instruction from Your Honor that we only elicit the very statement that was disclosed originally. We don't believe that any part, the state simply does not believe that Ms. Olson has been tainted or influenced. We believe, frankly, because of her candor and freely giving this information and letting us know that she has been watching the trial and she did listen to Emma's testimony, that she's being very forthright about it. So the state does believe under, I believe, 615, the court does have discretion to allow this in. We recognize the concern, but we do not believe that she's been tainted. But we are asking today, Your Honor.
All right, Mr. Wixom, I guess one more question I have. When you say she's been watching the proceedings here in the trial, we had that motion in limine hearing. Do you know if she watched the previous motion in limine hearing that discussed her own potential testimony and whether that's part of what she's already observed?
I certainly just can't speak to whether she watched that portion. She just said after she testified, she had began watching. I will let the court know. I know that in my preparation of her last time, because I didn't want to run afoul of your order, I explained to her that the court had rule that told her that she could not get into that testimony. So she was at least made aware of the court's ruling prior to her testimony, so we could comply with the court's order.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wixom. What's the response from the defense then on the motion in limine regarding whether or not Ms. Olson should be permitted to testify about the comment on raising life insurance?
And Judge, permission to remain seated.
You may.
Judge, this is my concern. The court ruled previously that Ms. Olson, even though she'd been excluded, would be allowed to come back, and Mr. Wixom had an opportunity to discuss the case with Ms. Olson and elicited what he felt was new or information that they wanted to come back and provide to the jury. Then over a 4-day weekend, Mr. Wixom then preps the witness again. And suddenly the dynamic of what she said is changing. We had other people there. All of these other facts that are suddenly being elicited from her Judge, causes me some pause, and I'd like to renew my motion to exclude her. There are too many uncertainties here. We don't know how much Miss Wixom saw. We do know now that after viewing Emma Murray's testimony, the light suddenly came on, and now she suddenly recalls that, oh, there were a bunch of us there for lunch. And that only happened, Judge, after she realized Miss Murray had testified and contradicted what she said. Judge, there are a number of red flags here. And if the court's going to allow this to go on, we don't know what else she would say. And then the court brought up a point that I wanted to make as well, is what part of the motion in limine before did she view? It's bad enough that she viewed all of evidences here. We don't know how much Miss Wixom saw. We do know now that after viewing Emma Murray's testimony, the light suddenly came on, and now she suddenly recalls that, oh, there were a bunch of us there for lunch. And that only happened, Judge, after she realized Miss Murray had testified and contradicted what she said. Judge, there are a number of red flags here. And if the court's going to allow this to go on, we don't know what else she would say. And then the court brought up a point that I wanted to make as well, is what part of the motion in limine before did she view? It's bad enough that she viewed all of Emma's. It's bad enough that she observed the entire trial up until Mr. Wixom stopped her. It's bad enough that he's interviewed her and prepped her at least 2 times now. And each time, magically, she seems to change her testimony and modify her testimony. And it's not modifying her testimony in any way that would aid the defense, Judge. Ironically enough, both times the testimony changed to help the state. It's shocking. Additional interviews, and suddenly, unless there's other things that Mr. Wixom didn't provide to us. One other thing, Judge, is her statement is very clear. It isn't about before I retire. It isn't about at approximately, about retirement. Her statement is very clear. My husband thinks I should up my insurance before I retire. That's her statement. Before I retire. And now we're adding all of these other uncertainties to this thing, Judge, and quite frankly, it's extremely prejudicial. So I'm going to renew my motion to strike, and at the very least, Judge, the additional statements should at the very least be struck as well.
All right, Mr. Wixom, response from the state, please.
Just briefly, Your Honor, Judge, I don't mean any slight to Mr. Pryor. I don't appreciate his innuendo or suggesting that perhaps I've done anything to influence this witness. I haven't. And in fact, that's why I candidly told him about the new information before we had this proceeding. It's why I asked for a sidebar and articulated to the court the very additional information that was provided. What I never did get from Ms. Olson was any indication that Mr. Pryor in the last 4 years has ever done anything to contact her or talk to her. Certainly hasn't done it in the last 2 months, and certainly hasn't done it in the last 4 days. So I don't think there was anything that prohibited Mr. Pryor from reaching out and having his own conversation with a witness to discuss potential testimony. That said, I do think she was very candid with what she said. She didn't try to hide it. And we're not asking, we see the issue that the defense has about the additional pieces of testimony. We recognize that. But we're not asking, Your Honor, to put that in front of the jury. We're simply asking to put the pieces of information that have always been disclosed. And frankly, Judge, there has never been any proposed change to testimony that the state has offered this court up until this morning. We have always maintained that we wish to introduce the evidence as it was included in the recorded audio interview and report that had been provided to Mr. Pryor since 2020. We've never suggested any alteration of what she would say until this morning when she gave us these new facts. That said, Judge, I think the court has a clear picture. We've certainly have not done anything to try to intentionally influence this witness. We've done nothing but try to be candid with the court, with the defense counsel. And that's all that we have.
All right, thank you. All right, well, I've considered this motion in limine as it relates to the state's intent to recall witness Janice Olson in the rebuttal stage of these proceedings. A couple of points. First of all, I certainly do appreciate the candor of the state in bringing the matter to the court before the witness takes the stand in a sidebar to identify the issues that raised concern for the court to determine here outside of the presence of the jurors. I would also echo what Mr. Wixom started with there at the end of his, or beginning of his second argument, that I don't find anything improper that has occurred with the state improperly coaching a witness or providing some sort of feeding of answers to the witness, nor do I find anything that would make me question the veracity or truthfulness of Ms. Olson, who's already previously testified in this matter. The point I have to focus on at this point is a couple of things. First, I've had an ongoing concern about this statement, whether or not it passes the relevancy standards under rules 401 and 403 in the statement of talking about Tammy Daybell making a comment that the defendant requested she look at upping her life insurance before retirement. There wasn't any real context in the trial about facts of when she was planning on retiring, that was any time in the near future, that she had only worked at that job a couple of years. So I've had that concern. The other concerns that were brought up and were previously litigated in another motion involving hearsay and other issues, I've considered. The part here that causes me greater concern are these what are called additional facts in the statement, and the fact that in particular the testimony now, what we know she would say if allowed is that there was a group of people present for this conversation. And if that was the statement, and that information had been relayed to the defense before trial at some point, that would provide an opportunity to either corroborate or impeach that testimony by potentially figuring out, well, who else was there, who was listening to this statement? Does another witness say, yes, this conversation occurred, or no, it did not occur? And so the request now that her testimony be limited to what is essentially a limited context, when I think the context matters and is important, is concerning, because at this stage in the proceedings, that simply leaves the defense with no opportunity to go in and verify or corroborate who else was at the table. And in addition, there was another newer statement about the timing of retirement potentially, which hasn't been raised or brought up until today. And again, that goes directly to that relevancy issue and what weight the jurors may give the statement, and is also another fact that the defense would not have had an opportunity to previously look at, even though the discovery may have included that she would be called, that the defense potentially had an opportunity to interview her before trial. The reality is, in the first motion limine, we had a specific narrow statement that was proposed to be offered, and that's now been expanded in both who heard it and the facts that would come along with it. So I think that the proposal that I just limit that testimony down does not necessarily, number one, provide the jury with an adequate, true context of what happened here because of that limitation. And number two, I think in rebuttal here, where she's already testified, is just unfair to the defense without an opportunity now to challenge who else may have been present for this conversation, and was that accurately recalled by the witness, or does anyone else recall that discussion taking place? So for those reasons, upon considering the motion in limine under Rule 615, I am going to exclude Janice Olson from further testifying in the state's rebuttal evidence here at this time, having considered all that, including the testimony of Emma Murray as well, which did open the door for this, but I think the expanded scope of where this could go is problematic at this stage. So in the court's discretion, I'm going to disallow the testimony of the witness. Any questions on that ruling, Mr. Pryor?
No questions, Judge.
Mr. Wixom, any questions on the court's ruling?
No question, Judge, and certainly the state accepts the court's ruling, but we would just, unless I misunderstood the court, she has always maintained the issue of the retirement being her reason. So I just wanted to note that, but we understand the court's ruling.
Okay, well, I appreciate that, Mr. Wixom. So thanks for allowing time to take that up. We'll now, I believe, get the jurors brought in if they're ready, and we'll start. So who will the state be calling as a witness at this time?
Dr. Christensen?
Okay, thank you. And that's your witness, Ms. Blake?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay.
All right, please. Here's our President for Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Please be seated. Okay, we are on the record on case CR 22211623, State of Idaho versus Chad Guy Daybell. After the Memorial Day weekend, continuing with the state's rebuttal. At this time, the court would note the jurors, all 17 have returned and each has signed their juror affirmation that they followed the court's admonishing instruction as we broke for the weekend. So thank you again for continuing to follow that instruction each time we have a recess. At this time, then, the state is continuing to present witnesses in rebuttal. Ms. Blake, if you'd like to call your next witness, you may.
The state would call Dr. Eric Christensen.
You solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let me see.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Blake, you may inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Would you please remind the jury who you are?
Yes, Eric Christensen. I'm the recently retired chief medical examiner from the state of Utah.
And Dr. Christensen, have you been watching any portions of this trial with the exception of Dr. Raven's testimony?
No, and I haven't watched that. I've just read the transcript.
And outside of that, you have not heard the other testimony presented. Is that correct?
I have not.
How long did you work at the Utah Medical Examiner's office?
15 and a half years.
And Dr. Christensen, when you are looking at an autopsy, are you looking at more than just the autopsy itself in order to reach a conclusion as to a cause and manner of death?
Yes, that's a routine part of what we do, is not just the autopsy itself, but the evaluation of any tests that we order, as well as a review of whatever history we can find that will help us sort things out.
And why do you do that?
It's essentially information gathering. I think I may have said when I was here last that I don't have the ability to sit down and talk with my patients and ask them what's going on with you, what happened with you. And so all of that sort of information for me comes from other sources. It can be from medical records. It can be from interviews with people that knew them. It can be any number of things. And so we gather all that other kind of information and attempt to understand what's going on with that person.
And you mentioned that your patient can't talk to you.
Yes.
Do you recall making that statement? Would that be similar to when?
Yes, questions about and that history gathering, those papers they always make you fill out before you go in or send you ahead of time, and all those kind of things. That's information gathering, similar to what we do in our context. Just we don't have the ability to get it directly from the patient.
And when you're gathering that information, is it because you've already formed a conclusion and you're simply trying to find information to back it up?
No.
Is it the opposite?
Yes, it's an attempt to basically find as much information as we can that will be relevant to why this person died, and then sorting that problem out.
And then turning to Tammy Daybell, the autopsy on Tammy Daybell.
Yes,
And as part of your involvement in the case, did you review other documents?
yes,
Did those documents include medical records?
they did.
Generally speaking, if you're doing an autopsy where the cause of death is not immediately apparent, do you generally request medical records?
Yes, that's a fairly routine part of what we do.
And again, is that to provide you that background information to help informing your conclusion?
Yes,
And in this case, do you recall receiving multiple additional reports from law enforcement?
yes, we did.
And at some point, did you review those?
Yes,
And did you at some point also create a list, or did the Office of the Medical Examiner keep some kind of a list of all those documents reviewed?
yes,
And did those include reports from the coroner and or interviews of the coroner from
Yes.
Fremont County?
both.
And also the deputy coroner,
Yes,
the officer that arrived on scene of Tammy's death?
yes,
Did you also review reports regarding an attempted shooting?
yes,
Did you review multiple reports involving people providing some background information about Tammy?
yes.
Did that include background information regarding her health?
Some of them commented on that. Yes.
And when we talk about those medical records, do you recall which medical records you reviewed?
We reviewed records from the Teton Clinic as well as from Seasons Medical, and then we also were able to get records from a clinic in Springville, Utah, where she had been seen before relocating to Idaho.
And at some point, have you also had an opportunity to review a report prepared by Dr. Raven?
Yes,
Did you see in that report her list of documents she reviewed?
yes,
Is it fair to say that it was much smaller than the list you reviewed?
Overall,
yes. There was a lot less. We reviewed a lot more than what was on her list.
Did you also note that she made no indication of reviewing medical records?
Yeah, there was no list of medical records in the report that I saw.
And in her report, she'd reached a conclusion.
She did.
In your review of her report and just looking at what she looked at, if you hadn't had the additional information, would you have maybe reached her same conclusion?
Certainly possible. Yes.
And again, is that exactly why you request the additional documentation so that you can make an informed decision?
Yes, it changes when you are dealing with multiple possible causes of death, you're looking for information that will help you either increase or decrease the likelihood of any one of those possibilities. And so, yeah, that additional information gathering is aimed at that endeavor.
And again, that additional information is not to confirm a decision you've already made. Is that correct?
No.
It's simply to provide you necessary information.
Yes.
And when we talk about Tammy's autopsy, again, can you talk us through, when you start that autopsy, what external injuries, if any, did you observe?
The only injuries she had that were externally visible were a few bruises on her upper arms and one on her chest.
So again, is it fair to say when you first observed Tammy, the cause of death is not readily apparent?
That's correct.
And then when you performed the actual autopsy, can you remind us internally what you observed as far as her organs?
Yeah, essentially normal organs, normal brain, normal heart, no significant pathology in any of her organs.
Do you recall observing something called pulmonary edema?
Yes.
And can you again explain what that is for the jurors?
Yeah, pulmonary edema is simply buildup of fluid within the lungs. Fluid leaks out of the alveolar capillaries, the little small vessels that are involved in exchanging air into the blood in the lungs. And as a result of a variety of different processes, that fluid can leak out of those capillaries and start filling the air spaces. And then mixes with the proteins and things that are already in those spaces and creates a foamy froth.
So as you're doing the internal autopsy, was a cause of death readily apparent at that point?
No.
Based on what you observed, what did you determine were possible causes of death?
So in any case where you have essentially no significant findings, she had pulmonary edema was really it, then we are looking at a fairly short list of possible causes of death. Those include cardiac arrhythmias that are not related to structural problems in the heart. They include seizures, includes asphyxial deaths of all kinds. It would include drug intoxication. And those are probably the big four categories of things with no anatomic cause evident.
So if we break those down a little bit, can you remind everyone what you did in relation to the potential toxicology or poison overdose, looking into that?
Sure. We initially started with a fairly broad panel of toxicology testing.
Judge, I'm going to object at this point. It's becoming cumulative and not related to presentation of the defense.
On cumulative, Ms. Blake, is this distinguishing from testimony already proffered in the first time he's testified?
Just going over it to remind the jurors, I think in a trial of this length, generally, it's not necessarily considered cumulative to review some of the information.
And Judge, that's a walking response. It's cumulative.
Well, at this point, Ms. Blake, I will ask you to just maintain the scope to what's proper on rebuttal at this time and not, I will sustain a cumulative objection if it's simply the repetition of testimony previously offered.
And if I may respond briefly.
Go ahead.
As far as for purposes of rebuttal, I think Dr. Raven did come in. She presented that she made findings. We went over what she did and didn't review. So I think reviewing with the medical examiner what he went through is proper for rebuttal.
Okay, well, again, I'll at this point sustain that objection. If you'd like to continue, I'll just keep an eye on that. If you could keep the scope to rebuttal, please.
Toxicology tests were in fact conducted, correct?
Yes.
Based on those, did you find it likely that Tammy would have died of anything related to toxicology issues?
No.
And then what is another cause that can that you would look into?
Seizures was also something we assessed.
And again, you reviewed Tammy's medical records, is that right?
Yes.
Any notations or signs of a prior history of seizures?
No.
Did you ultimately determine seizures was a likely cause of Tammy's death?
No, it was not a likely cause.
And then you said a cardiac arrhythmia.
Yes.
Similarly, did you look at Tammy's heart?
Yes.
Any signs of irregularities?
Her heart was structurally normal.
Given her age, medical records, and your review of everything, did you determine that a cardiac arrhythmia was a likely cause of death?
It was not.
And what did that leave you with?
That left asphyxial causes essentially at that point.
Did you see any indications in Tammy's medical records of any negative interaction of any drugs and or homeopathic medication she may have been using?
Judge, again, it's cumulative.
Overruled.
Are you aware or did you learn that Tammy was taking an antidepressant?
Yes.
Did you see any signs or indication that the antidepressant played a role in her death?
No.
Did you see any sign or indication that sleep apnea may have played a role in her death?
No.
Did you see anything in her medical records regarding sleep apnea?
Not that I recall. No.
Would sleep apnea generally be something that you would be concerned about causing a sudden death for someone?
When it does, it certainly can be associated with sudden death, but generally speaking, that is in the setting of someone who has significant additional comorbidities, usually significant obesity and underlying heart disease.
In reviewing Tammy's medical records and performing the autopsy, was Tammy obese?
No.
Are you familiar with, I may say this term wrong, but colloidal silver?
Colloidal silver.
Colloidal
Yes.
silver? Any indication that played a role in Tammy's death?
No.
And we talked about ultimately the cause of death being determined to be asphyxiation.
Yes.
When you are looking at the manner of death, how many potential manners do you consider?
There are generally 5. A death can be ruled for manner, can be ruled a natural death, an accident, a suicide, a homicide, or undetermined.
In this case, did you see any indication that led you to believe the asphyxiation was natural?
No.
Did you see any sign or indication that led you to believe the asphyxiation was accidental?
No.
Did you see any sign or indication to lead you to believe the death was suicide?
No.
So the 2 categories left would be homicide and undetermined, is that correct?
Yes.
Is it fair to say undetermined is a category if 2 or more of the other 4 are still on the table?
Yes. Generally, we will use undetermined. The most common scenario where we encounter that is overdose deaths, where someone, for example, has a history of abusing medication, but also has a history of depression and maybe even prior overdose attempts, and then they're dead of an overdose that is related to something that they routinely abuse. In the absence of a note or something else like that, it's very difficult to distinguish whether that overdose was intentional or not. And so we use undetermined as manner for those kinds of things.
And in your experience with the autopsies you've conducted and the death certificates you've signed off on, at some point have you used all of those different manners on different death certificates?
Yes.
So is it fair to say in this case, you weren't starting with the conclusion that it was homicide and working backwards?
No.
Was it the opposite direction?
Yes.
Once you determined that the other 3 manners were not likely, that left you with which one?
Homicide or undetermined, but there was really nothing to compete with homicide. And so undetermined was taken off the table.
In your review of Dr. Raven's report and testimony and the questioning here today and through the trial, has your opinion as to the cause of death changed?
No.
Has your opinion as to the manner of death changed?
No.
And what did you determine the cause of death to be
Asphyxia.
and the manner of death?
Homicide.
I have no further questions.
All right, thank you, Ms. Blake. Mr. Pryor Cross.
Thank you, Judge. Good morning, Dr. Christensen.
Good morning.
I'd like to go procedurally through the process of what you performed in this particular case, if we could.
Sure.
At some point, you were present for the exhumation of Tammy Daybell, is that correct?
That's correct.
And then within the same day, you performed an autopsy, is that correct?
Yes,
You came to, you did your analysis of that autopsy, made your findings at that point, is that correct?
not on that day, no.
Okay. You drew some medical conclusions about the items that you would cross off your list. Would that be fair at that time?
We had some initial information, but not enough to exclude anything at that point.
What initial information did you have?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, you said you had initial information. Is that at the time of the autopsy or was that before the autopsy?
Yes, at the time of the autopsy, that's what I meant.
So then at the conclusion of the autopsy and on the same day that they reburied Tammy Daybell, at that point, you started requesting additional information from law enforcement. Would that be fair?
Yes.
And do you recall specifically what you asked for law enforcement in terms of what you requested at that point?
I don't recall specifically, no.
A lot of items.
Yes, we received ultimately a lot of items.
And let me ask you, have you ever heard the expression confirmatory bias?
Confirmation bias, yes,
Okay.
I've heard that.
So I guess I'm using it in a psychology context, confirmation bias. And isn't it true confirmation bias is a situation in which you have science and you're examining a
Objection, Your Honor. Counsel's testifying. Move to strike.
Overruled.
confirmation bias, isn't it true? Confirmation bias is a situation where you're given a certain number of facts, and then you go outside those facts to get collateral information that may or may not influence your decision. Would you agree with that?
Not exactly, no. I mean, confirmation bias to me, my understanding of that concept is that you, at some point along a process of making a decision, you have information, you come to a conclusion, and then you essentially evaluate all subsequent information in light of that initial conclusion, both looking selectively for things that support your opinion and rejecting things that don't conform to that opinion.
Okay, so at some point you requested a number of items from law enforcement, is that right? After you did the autopsy, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and then you mentioned that you reviewed, I think, Teton Medical, do you recall that?
Yes.
Seasons Medical,
Yes.
and then a small amount of medical on Springville, right?
Correct.
There wasn't much there, correct?
No, I don't believe so.
And when we talk about the amount of information provided to you from law enforcement, it was significant, wasn't it?
It was a lot of information, yes.
Do you have any idea approximately how much time it spent to go through all that information that you were provided by law enforcement?
I would guess multiple hours, but I don't have an exact number.
Okay. And at some point, you hadn't made a decision at this point, is that correct?
That's correct.
And at this point, you didn't have anything specifically in your evaluation that caused you to go away from either undetermined or asphyxia homicide, correct? That's where you were at the end?
At the end, ultimately, our final discussion was around the deciding between undetermined or homicidal asphyxia.
Okay, and at that point, based on your review of all of the law enforcement reports and everything that the police officers have provided to you, you decided to lean towards homicide. Is that right?
But we made a decision that this we would rule this a homicide, yes.
As part of your review of this case, did you talk to Chad's daughter, Emma Murray?
No.
Did you talk to Chad's daughter, Leah?
No.
Did you talk to Chad's son, Garth?
No.
Did you talk to Chad's son, Mark?
No.
Did you talk to Chad's son, Seth?
No.
Did you talk to Chad's mom or dad?
No.
Okay. So you got information from law enforcement, is that correct?
Yes.
But you didn't go back and look at anything provided to you from the family to give you some concept of what potentially the family history or medical was, correct?
Nothing was provided to me from the family.
Well, nothing was provided, but you didn't ask, right?
I did not.
Your Honor, argumentative.
Overruled.
You didn't ask, did you?
I did not.
And you specifically asked the police officers to provide you information about this case. Is that right?
Honor, asked and answered multiple times.
Sustained.
After you provided this exhaustive list of police reports that they provided to you, at what specific date did you make your determination?
I don't know specifically when it was. It was sometime in the days immediately preceding when we signed the report, but I don't recall specifically which of those days.
Would it be fair to say that it was 14, 15 months later that you finally signed the report?
I believe that's about the right timeline. Yes, 13, 14 months.
So after 14 or 15 months of looking at this, you then made the
At Jiffy Lube, we car about cars. In fact, we're kind of obsessed. It's why we've been taking
to the autopsy. And obviously, I'm not a medical examiner. But when I read the autopsy, I noted that you didn't make any note of the inflammation that was occurring in Tammy's lungs. Is there a reason why you didn't bring that up?
Because there's no significant inflammation in her lungs.
And you made the determination that it wasn't significant, correct?
That's correct.
So we don't know what the level of the inflammation was at the time that Tammy Daybell died, right?
Objection, Your Honor. Counsel's testifying misstates prior testimony. Move to strike.
Sustain. I'll strike the question.
Do you know the level of inflammation that was in Tammy Daybell's lung at the time of her death?
I know it was in her lungs at the time I looked at them from the time of autopsy, which I
Okay.
expected to be reflective of that.
All right. And if there's inflammation in the lungs, that would be a reasonable explanation for why we had potential fluids in the lungs, would it not?
There was not sufficient inflammation in her lungs to account for the pulmonary edema that was present.
Okay. And at no time when you testified the first time, did you mention the fact that there was inflammation in Tammy Daybell's lungs, did you?
No. And do you want further response?
Well, you can if you'd like. Go ahead.
There's inflammation. Inflammatory cells are a normal constituent of lungs, even normal healthy lungs. It's normal for there to be inflammatory cells there. In small numbers, they're there basically to do the job of what inflammatory cells do, fight intruders and deal with infections. And there was no significant increase in the amount of inflammatory cells present in her lung.
Okay, so if there's no, if it's part and parcel of a normal lung, then wouldn't the response in the autopsy say that it was a normal lung?
I would expect so, yes.
Yeah, and instead, in the autopsy, you talked about inflammation in the lung. So this wasn't part and parcel of just a little inflammation. There was inflammation in the lungs, wasn't there?
I would have to review them. I don't recall
Okay.
at this point.
And Judge, could I have a moment, please?
You may.
Thank you. So I previously discussed with you that on the very first time you testified, you didn't mention anything about inflammation in the lungs. Is that right?
And not that I recall.
All right. And then today, when the prosecutor called you back after the defense has rested their case as a rebuttal witness,
Objection, Your Honor. That's a narrative. Move to strike.
Sustained.
second time you're called back, questioned by the prosecutor. Again, no discussion about inflammation in the lungs,
Your
correct?
Honor, argumentative, asked and answered. Move to strike.
Overruled.
Second time you're back, again, no discussion about inflammation in the lungs, correct?
Correct.
And then only after the defense attorney gets up here and questions it does the subject come up. Is that right?
Yes.
Nothing else.
All right, Ms. Blake, redirect.
Dr. Christensen, have you testified before?
Yes.
And are you familiar with court proceedings that the state brings people back as rebuttal witnesses?
Yes.
So have you testified in that capacity before?
A couple of times. Yes.
Counsel just went over inflammation in the lungs pretty in depth. Again, was there any indication that inflammation of Tammy's lungs caused her death?
No.
I think you said there was no significant or There was no signs of inflammation that would have caused the pulmonary edema.
That's my recollection.
And you considered the possible causes of death given essentially a negative autopsy.
Yes.
In your role as a medical examiner in Utah, do you generally request reports if the cause of death is not readily apparent?
Yes.
And is that exactly what you did in this case?
Yes.
So nothing about this was different than what you would normally do as far as information gathering.
In terms of the gathering, no. The volume was certainly different, but what we request is not different. There was just a lot more generated in this case.
And in reviewing the reports provided by law enforcement, were there any reports where Chad's kids had agreed to speak with law enforcement and provide information?
Not that I recall.
Would it surprise you to learn that they refused?
Judge, I'm going to
law
object.
enforcement?
Hearsay.
Overruled.
Would it surprise you to learn that they refused to speak with law enforcement?
I don't know if it would surprise me or not. I mean, certainly they're right not to talk to law enforcement, but
And if you had been provided reports that included statements from the kids, would you have reviewed them?
absolutely.
And if none were provided, would it surprise you to learn it's because they don't exist?
No.
And again, when you're requesting that additional information, is it because you've already made a decision and you're simply trying to support it?
No.
And in fact, is it the opposite?
Yes. We gather information to help us make a decision.
And is that what you did in this case?
It is.
And again, based on the information you gathered, the autopsy, anything about questions today or other information that would cause you to change your opinion?
No.
And again, your opinion on the manner of death?
Manner of death was homicide.
I have no further questions.
All right.
Judge, I have additional questions.
What topic?
Kids, no reports.
Your Honor, that was well within the scope.
That was within the scope. It was brought up on cross, so I don't see that there was a door open for any recross at this point. So that'll conclude the testimony then of Dr. Christensen. The state can call its next witness.
The state would call David Stubbs.
You solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
All right, I'll note, Officer Stubbs is on the stand, has been sworn again. I am going to inquire, have you been observing or reviewing any of this trial testimony since you were last here?
No, sir.
And have you discussed with anyone else testimony they've given?
No, sir.
All right, thanks for your responses. Mr. Wood, if you'd like to inquire, you may.
Mr. Stubbs, you've testified before, but can you just briefly remind the jury of your name and your law enforcement experience?
Well, retired detective, Rexburg Police Department. Served in that capacity for approximately 30 years.
Do you recall testifying about serving warrants on Google in this case?
I do.
Did you receive Google records for an email account, chad.daybell@gmail.com?
Yes, I did.
What type of records did you receive when you got those?
Well, anything that was in the warrant that Google would have record of that we asked for, things like search history, location services, user, owner of the account information, things like that.
And did you review those records?
I did.
Did you review the Google, the search history records?
Yes.
When you reviewed those records, did you find anything related to turning location data off on a phone?
Yes, I did.
What did you find?
January 3rd, 2019, the user of the account looked up how to turn off the location services on location or GPS services on an iPhone.
Your Honor, I'd ask that the witness be handed what's been marked as State's Exhibit 107C. Defense has been previously provided a copy, and I have a courtesy copy of that and 2 other exhibits for the court.
All right. Mr. Wood, these have not been previously admitted, is that correct?
That is, well, they do come in under the business records affidavit that was admitted under 107,
Okay. I just was.
but they have not
clarifying.
previously been admitted, these specific items.
Very well, thank you.
Detective, do you recognize what's been marked as State's Exhibit 107C?
I do.
What is it?
It would be the in portion search history from the Chad.Daybell Google search history.
And did you, what you're seeing on that screen or that piece of paper, is that a true and accurate representation of what you viewed in the search history?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, the state would move for admission of State's Exhibit 107C.
Any objection?
No objection.
107C is admitted.
And may I publish the ammo?
Yes.
Detective, what do you see on this page?
This would be in part some of the search history from the Chad.Daybell Google search history.
And what is the date on those searches?
This would be January 3rd, 2019.
Detective, when you get, have you had other occasions to review returns from Google for Gmail accounts?
Yes, I have.
And you talked earlier about looking for location data.
Correct.
Where do you normally find that in the return?
So when Google sends you a return of requested items from your search warrant, most generally, if they have information, it'll come in different, if you will, folders in one packet. And those packets are all labeled, folders are all labeled. So there's usually a folder that has location services as the heading.
Was there any such folder in the chad.daybell@gmail.com return?
There was a tab of that, yes.
And did you open that folder?
Yes.
What did you find in that folder?
When you open it, it's usually if there is information, it will come in the form of an Excel spreadsheet. However, if they don't have anything, it'll open up in a different window that says, as did this one, that there were no location services available.
Your Honor, I'd ask that the witness be handled what's been marked as 107D. Mr. Stubbs, do you recognize State's Exhibit 107D?
I do.
What does it purport to be?
It was, as I before mentioned, when opening that tab from the return statement saying that there are no locations available for the date range inquired.
And on State's Exhibit 107D, is that a true and accurate representation of what that folder appears, of what appears in that folder when you open it?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, the state would move for admission of State's Exhibit 107D.
Any objection?
No objection.
107D is admitted.
And may I publish?
You may.
Detective, what is on the screen?
So this is just what it would say, or what it did say when opening up that particular folder under the chad.daybell@gmail.com. States does not have records, data available to export from the data range 1/1 of 1970 to 12/31/2019. So there was nothing available to give to us.
And to be clear, normally when you could click on that page, there's an Excel spreadsheet.
Yes, if there was data available, there would be an Excel spreadsheet showing different locations and whatnot.
Mr. Stubbs, through your training and experience, are you aware if a Google user can request to have their location data deleted?
Yes, that is a possible feature.
How does someone go about doing that?
There's various ways you can do it, depending on the type of service you're using. But with Google, such as Google Maps, you could actually go into your user account and request that your information not be tracked, number one. Number two, you can request that all past data be retracted from their records as well. You can do that in the Maps account. You can do it in your Gmail account. You can do it in your phone as well.
Thank you. In your review of the chad.daybell@gmail information, did you find a record of any such request?
Yes.
What did you find?
August 24th, 2019, a request was made through the Gmail account of chad.daybell to have all location GPS history deleted from the account.
Your Honor, I ask that the witness be handed State's Exhibit 107E.
I got it. Thank you.
Mr. Stubbs, do you recognize State's Exhibit 107E?
I do.
What does it purport to be?
This would have been in the same Gmail account return, the Google Confidential and Proprietary tab. It is delete request and this was done 8/24/2019.
And what format is that document in?
So because there was information, this looks to be in an Excel spreadsheet form.
And that form, the way it appears before you now, is that how it appears in the Google return?
Yes, when we got the return from Google, this is exactly how it appeared.
And so exactly how it appeared, is it fair to say that's a true and accurate representation of what you viewed in that the chad.daybell@gmail information?
Yes.
Your Honor, the state would move for admission of State's Exhibit 107E.
No objection, Judge.
All right, Exhibit 107E is admitted.
And may I publish?
Yes.
Detective,
If I can, oh, yep, I sure do.
can you point out the title of that page?
Confidential and priority. Would be the, excuse me,
In the body of that document, what do you see of interest to your investigation?
so this is all location services. This was done, would have been 8/24/2019. Should be noted that the deletion range here goes back to 1970. Customarily in a lot of computer
Judge, I'm going to object. This is going to go beyond, it's non-responsive.
The 1970 date, is that date familiar to you?
it is a date commonly used by computer formats where they start recording, if you will, computer activity. 1970 1/1 is a common date for a lot of different formats that they start.
And again, what date was this request made?
This would been requested 24th, 2019.
Detective, we had earlier on the screen State's Exhibit 107C, the search history you spoke about.
Yes.
When you get that search history, can you actually click on the items that were searched?
So if you recall, the short answer is yes.
Did you click on those items that were marked in State's Exhibit 107C?
Yes.
What did you see when you did?
So it took me to, when you go to that, it has specific instructions, detailed instructions on how to turn those services off on iPhone device.
Your Honor, I have no further questions at this time.
All right, thank you, Mr. Wood.
What should we do?
I'm going to cashnetusa.com. I can apply in minutes, and if approved, we can have the money as soon as the same business day.
Go to cashnetusa.com to apply for the money you need.
Exhibits, Mr. Bailiff, if you'd please submit those to Mr. Pryor, 107 C, D, and E.
Thank you. And I saw that Mr. Wood called you Mr. Stubbs. Is that acceptable to you?
That'll work.
All right, thank you. So, Mr. Stubbs, on Exhibit 107C, it has a date of January 3rd, 2019. You recall that?
Yes.
And that's the turning off the location services of a iPhone or iPad.
Correct.
Okay. Are you aware that Chad Daybell has an Android device?
Yes.
Okay. Are you aware that Tammy Daybell had an iPad device?
I'm sorry, one more time.
Had an iPad device.
That Tammy did?
Yeah.
I'm not sure of that.
Okay. So if someone's trying to turn the location off on January 3rd of 2019 for an iPhone or an iPad, that doesn't necessarily mean they're looking up how to turn off an Android device, does it?
That's correct.
Okay. So this search was in talking Apple devices, right?
That is right.
And you're aware that Chad Daybell didn't have an Apple device, right?
I'm not sure if he had an Apple device, but I know he had an Android.
Okay. You're also aware that around January 3rd of 2019, that was shortly or around the time that Chad Daybell started having an extramarital affair with Lori Vallow, right?
Yes.
Okay, so it wouldn't be unusual for someone who's having an affair, even if Chad doesn't have an iPhone or an iPad, to try to maybe hide the fact that he's having an affair with someone, correct?
That could be the case.
Okay. Now, you talk specifically about turning off Google location devices, right? That's what this is about, right?
From the searches, yes.
Yeah, so that relates to merely the information that Google is gathering for location services, correct?
Yes, but also the user was asking for how to turn those off using an Apple device.
Yeah, using an Apple device, right? Okay. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're turning off all of your location devices, right?
Are you talking about different devices?
Yeah, I'm talking about different devices.
I can only speculate that they're,
Judge, I'm,
Overruled. It's,
Go ahead.
you posed the question, he can answer. But
I can only speculate that they're referring to one device.
okay. An iPhone or an Apple device, right?
Correct.
You said it's the user's account. That's what you said, right? It's the user's account. The person who did this was the user's account.
Was using the Chad.Daybell account, yes.
We don't know who was using the account to turn off location services on their Apple device, right?
I can't tell you who was using the account other than the account name.
Are you aware in the Daybell family between Chad and Tammy, which one was the computer person in that relationship?
I can't testify to that.
Okay. 8/24/2019. The exhibit talks about going back to 1970. It's not unusual to do a deletion of your search history, is it, in any regard with anybody, right?
I guess
Objection
that,
calls for speculation.
overruled.
Anybody can do a search history and delete their search history, right?
that's correct.
And if you're having an affair with someone close in time when maybe that person may be moving from Arizona to Idaho, You may want to delete your history to cover your tracks, right?
Possibly.
Okay. There's no other way to decide who was doing that search history deletion though, right?
Other than the account user
Right.
name, no.
And you don't know the location of where they were conducting that deleting that search history, right?
That is correct.
Okay. All right, Judge, I have nothing else. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Wood, redirect.
Yes, just briefly. Mr. Stubbs, you were asked by counsel about the possibility of deleting location data to hide an affair.
Yes.
And through your investigation, are you aware if Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow were having an affair?
Yes.
Are you aware if Lori Vallow had an iPhone?
Yes, she did.
Counsel asked you about deleting search histories to cover the tracks of an affair.
Yes.
Could a person also delete their location data to cover the tracks of crimes committed?
Yes.
If part of those crimes involved the location of missing children, could that be a reason to delete that data?
Yes.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, I think this is a good breaking point probably for the mid-morning recess. Is the state gonna have another witness to call?
Judge, may we approach just briefly?
Yes. Oh, yeah, you can go ahead and step down. Thank you.
I'd been wondering whether it was possible to find out if somebody turned off the location data or not. And so they answered that question for me. Well, what is my kitty doing? So, let's see.
All right, thanks, counsel. We'll go ahead and take that mid-morning recess, and then the state does have an additional witness to call after that. So we'll go ahead and be on recess until, let's reconvene at 10:30 for the next witness, please.
All right, please.
So, a big debate is when will we have closing arguments? They said one more witness. Is that more than one witness, or just they'll have one witness after the break? Now, I understand they're recalling Emma that she got subpoenaed, but I don't know if that's who it is. One thing I've been wondering about is, are the witnesses who are called on the punishment phase to deliberate or to for the jury to determine whether or not you should be executed or not? are they barred from seeing any testimony up to this point? Because it seems to me that everybody has been told that they're no longer under subpoena at this point, and if they still have to be under the exclusion order, that's not going to leave a lot of people possibly to testify. So a little curious about that. Let's take a look and see what Twitter is saying. Now, oops, Kitty, what are you doing? Kitty's chewing on something. Pryor asked if you knew who was the computer expert in the family, Chad or Tammy. Well, we know it's Tammy, but you don't have to be a computer expert to Google how to turn off something. You don't have to be an expert to Google anything. So, yeah, that doesn't mean anything. Let's see. Barney Nanas is speaking one up, says, gee, I wonder why Chad Daybell would have wanted Google to delete his location data. It's curious. Cross-stitching Mama says, boom, Chad requested all tracking / GPS / location data to be deleted from Google in August 2019. Yeah. Little Lisa's unpopular opinion for the state of Idaho versus Chad Daybell. Lindsay Blake is more skillful as a prosecutor as opposed to her co-counsel Rob Wood. This is the female version of John Lewin. See, California versus late Robert Durst. I figure this is the rebuttal case for the prosecution. Yeah, I don't think that it's an unpopular opinion. It's a common opinion that Lindsay Blake is doing a really great job. So I don't know why she says it's unpopular. All right. Kari Bear says, no, Pryor. It's called confirmation bias in psychology as well. You just keep messing it up. Yeah, that's exactly what I thought. So, tomorrow, I'm supposed to have my eye exam, which has been rescheduled multiple times. And if they've only got one witness, are we going to be having closing arguments and jury deliberations tomorrow? I might not get my eye exam for a few more weeks at this rate. Let's take... I understand that the Trump trial is having closing arguments today. Don't really care to follow that one because it's so politically charged, and you know, people have very divergent opinions on it. Okay, let's take a quick look at, let's see. Okay, I'm not seeing anything particularly noteworthy on YouTube, so let's go to my playlist. Oh, let's see. Okay, this is Court TV biggest moments from the trial as of 2 days ago. So let's take a look at that as soon as we get past the obligatory commercial here. Yep. Sorry, we're having trouble with StreamYard here for a second. I need to refresh the tab.
Murder charges. Little JJ, his new wife's son, Tylee, his new wife's daughter, and Tammy, his first wife. Those are the victims. So what we're going to do in this hour is take a look at some of the biggest moments from the case that have happened. Put some context on them, and then some great analysis from our think tank. So let's start by bringing in our Court TV legal correspondent. Is she with us? She's not with us? Where is she? Kelly Craft. Welcome to the program. Great to see you out there in Boise tonight. Thanks so much for joining us. So Kelly has been working hard all day. She works hard every day, but really hard today, gathering and putting together all of these big moments for us. So what is our first big moment we're going to take a look at?
Well, hi there, Vinny. Our first big moment that we want to talk about tonight is this never before seen body cam footage that was shown in court. This was about the third week of trial, and it's investigators showing up at Lori Vallow Daybell's apartment and asking her, where is JJ? Where is your little boy? So what happened here is Kay Woodcock, who is JJ Vallow's biological grandmother, she would always talk to JJ and see him, her as well as Larry, her husband. But then they couldn't get a hold of JJ any longer. So they called the authorities, and authorities went to do a welfare check on Lori. Well, what did Lori do? She would appear all frazzled to them. She kept telling her that her life has been a nightmare. She told them that little JJ Vallow was with her friend in Arizona. And then eventually they said, well, who is this friend? And she said, Melanie Gibb. And she said, Melanie Gibb's son also has autism, just like my little boy, JJ, who is special needs. Let's listen to some of that body cam footage and what she had to say.
So, who's the friend he's with?
My friend Melanie. Her son has autism. Her name's Melanie Gibb. I gave him all the information on the phone.
Okay, so he can call him.
Yeah.
This part.
Yeah. What is all this?
Well, that's why we're concerned, because it just was kind of weird.
It is very weird. I've had to move around a lot. One of my brothers is trying to kill me. Not the brother that lives here, obviously. He's kind of my protector. My other brother that was in with my husband, who was trying to kill me for my $2 million life insurance policy. So I don't tell people the truth about where we are and what we're doing because of those reasons. So I look like a suspect, but I am a good person. Raised all of my kids. I've done everything that I'm supposed to do in life, but everyone is causing me trouble right now.
We had two detectives over here looking for you a little while ago.
Oh, because I was at the store.
And they ran into probably one of your brothers.
My brother and his friend, probably.
Oh,
They've
who's
been
that?
moving. Chad.
Chad from Round? What's his last name? Yeah, okay. All right.
So it's just a mess, but just constantly causing me trouble.
Chad the Daybell?
He's an author.
How long does it take to get a bikini body with wall Pilates? I got my bikini body at home simply by taking on the 30-day wall Pilates challenge. It completely...
Vinny, I love that at the end there when Lori is saying, Chad, oh, he's an author. And I loved how the investigators were just asking Chad Daybell, and then talking about how you spell it. Then one of them went on to say, didn't his wife just die? Doesn't he have a bunch of daughters? And then Lori said, oh, yeah, he has a bunch of kids, just acting so nonchalant about who Chad Daybell is.
Unbelievable. All right. Let's bring in our think tank tonight, get a little bit of analysis tonight. Joining us here live in studio, Daryl Cohen, criminal defense attorney, entertainment attorney, former assistant DA in Atlanta. Meg Strickler, criminal defense attorney, and the man behind the glasses, criminal defense attorney, Josh Schiffer. Great to have everyone here. So here's what I want to ask you about this, because this is Chad's trial, not Lori's trial. Does she come off in that video as someone who is very controlling, manipulative, and perhaps the one driving everything here?
I think Chad's last name has changed to Chad Daybell. He both dug funeral plots for the kids, and he's digging himself a conviction. So did she consider herself manipulative? Do we? I just think she is what she is. Nothing that we like, nothing that we want to see, but what we need to see.
But from the beginning, everyone's always wondering, who's the leader, who's the follower, who's making the moves, who's the one conspiring here? Does this do anything?
Not at all. What Dow just did, they work hand in glove. She looks like a nut, but what really is telling here, she's police officers in her same room as her, in her house, asking her questions about her kids. And she's like, la, 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 versus being respectful to the detectives and telling them where they are. And she can't tell them where they are because they're dead.
So I've got kind of two perspectives on this, because don't you agree that it is natural for her to be so disheveled with law enforcement being in her house if she doesn't have anything to hide. You would be natural and comfortable and maybe a little bit bubbly.
That's not what she is.
Most people are all freaked out and shut down. Now, when I see that video, my belief is this is her playing her role. She is out there. She's deeply involved with Chad. She knows exactly the trick that they're pulling on everyone, and they've worked on and discussed exactly what she's supposed to say when the police come poking around.
Agreed.
They were arm in arm, lockstep together. He manipulated her, she manipulated him, and the kids were killed.
Yeah, the part that troubles me the most about that video, though, is doesn't talk about JJ.
Horrible.
Doesn't talk about JJ.
That's horrible.
All right, let's bring back in Kelly Kraft, Court TV legal correspondent, as we continue taking a look at all these big moments. What's our second big moment?
Vinny, the second big moment is the text messages. So these alarming text messages that retired FBI agent Doug Hart, he read them on the stand. And what are they talking about? The death percentages for little JJ as well as Tylee. I believe that Tylee was at one point a .13, and Chad Daybell expresses to Lori that he's going to turn up the dial to make that death percentage go higher. And then JJ was at a point, Chad was saying he was sitting across the table from him, and that JJ, he was eating bacon and he could tell that his death percentage was rising. So why don't we go ahead and listen to some of these text messages. We have our producers that are going to read them for us tonight.
I have been instructed to focus my efforts on Hillary, so I will.
Okay, find out her percentage for me and JJ's.
She is 0.13. I turned up the pain to 10 and placed a spiritual virus in her. He is 99.99. Raphael visited him and told him to follow Amy into the light. I also assured him that James would live and take care of his mommy, which he will, with all of his heart and soul.
That is sweet. I miss you desperately. When you get home, check Tylee. She is being super sweet and helpful, and she cleaned her room. See if she got switched. Totally not her.
Yes, she was switched. Please let me know when you can talk, and I will explain it. One question. Do you want me to cause pain yet to those 2 3s you're riding with?
Probably hold off on them until we arrive. They will be a big mistake to deal with. But I'll text you if they start acting up and we can zap them.
Sounds great. Yes, if they are going to act up, we'll at least give them a reason to scream. I love, cherish, treasure, and adore you.
What is the percentage now? What about JJ's too?
Tammy is at 3, JJ is at 2. Both are being heavily shielded to stop intruders.
2 and 3%, not 0?
I will explain when we talk.
Okay, still feeling hot for you. Please check JJ. He just woke up saying crazy stuff, and you'll go back to sleep. He is talking to Blake. It's weird.
JJ is still JJ. I am told his spirit recognizes Blake as evil and is unsettled by him.
How is JJ now?
Yes, he's at 0. He probably was partly through the veil talking to people, both light and dark.
Do you think there is a perfectly orchestrated plan to take the children, and we just have to wait for it to be carried out?
You are doing everything right, my love. The Lord told me she is right on track.
So what we gained from these text messages and this death scale of Chad Daybell's, it kind of seemed that the closer a person was to 0 or then 99 would be the closer they are to death. So one end of the spectrum to the other over here, Vinny. So interesting text messages, to say the least, and scary.
Yeah, scary, and I think really bad for Chad. Let's bring back in our think tank. I think this is really, really bad for Chad Daybell. Extremely bad. I mean, he's the one here who's like zapping people.
It's basically the most concrete evidence we've got of are you kidding? Like full removal from the rest of humanity at this point. Like no one reads this and goes,
What's
"Oh no,
your
these are too."
percentage?
Yeah, can I cause you some pain?
Man, it depends on which of my girlfriends you're gonna. No, sorry. It really, this is crazy stuff. There's no way the jury reads this and isn't like, whoa.
So they're crazy, but it's still so scarily wrong to be talking about people who are their children.
Children.
And, I'll talk about later. He's at a 2. He's at a 0.
But-
Should I cause them some pain?
Yeah, he puts them down at 0, which means it's time to go.
To kill them.
He, as I say, his last name is now Chad, and from my view, Chad Daybell. He has dug his own grave.
All right. Everyone's staying with us. We've got more up next. More of our countdown of the biggest moments from the trial of Chad Daybell, including this shocking moment.
I got the inspiration to go back to my original death percentages that helped us track Charles, Ned, etc. Tammy is very close. Her percentage has fallen steadily since Hiplos left. It's encouraging.
Monday morning. The ultimate betrayals. Every episode of Accomplice to Murder. Spell was broken when the handcuffs went click.
Friends and family turning on each other. What he was willing to do for $1 million. But just who is the puppet?
She was a master manipulator.
And who's pulling the string?
Welcome back. Tonight, we're taking a look at the trial of the Doomsday Prophet Chad Daybell and all of the biggest moments. Kelly Craft, Court TV legal correspondent, is with us in Boise, Idaho tonight as we count down all these big moments. What do you have for us next?
Vinny, the next thing that we want to talk about tonight is the autopsy of Tammy Daybell. So a few weeks ago, we heard from the state's witness, the chief deputy medical examiner from the state of Utah. This is Dr. Lily Marsden. And what did she say? She talked about that the cause of death for Tammy Daybell was asphyxia and that the manner of death was homicide. Then fast forward to defense counsel's case, the case he put on for Chad Daybell and defending him. And what did his expert witness say? So she came in, this is Dr. Catherine Raven, and she determined that the cause of death should be ruled undetermined. Why don't we go ahead and listen to some of their testimony?
As you went through that process, did a cause of death become apparent for Tammy Daybell?
No.
Did you find anything abnormal or anything that caught your attention in doing that internal exam?
The only thing abnormal we really found on Tammy's examination was that she had a lot of fluid in her lungs, which we call pulmonary edema. And she had a foamy fluid in her airways, so her trachea and her larger bronchi.
Did you find any explanation or anything to explain the cause of death?
Not with toxicology. When we have negative autopsies like this, so it's not an autopsy that's completely normal, but there is no cause of death that we're able to see. There's a few things that we have to consider. So we consider, seizure disorders, we consider cardiac arrhythmias, and as far as non-natural causes, we consider asphyxia. And asphyxia is a diagnosis of exclusion. And in our opinion, we did thoroughly exclude the other potential causes of death with a negative autopsy.
Is it standard practice when there's no signs and there's no indication of what could have caused the death to take a jump to asphyxia? Is that what would be the common practice?
In my opinion, no. The way I practice and the way I've always taught people to practice in the institutions I've been associated with, again, we would call them undetermined. We do get cases where we don't find anything. We don't jump to conclusions or speculate. We just say these are things that might have happened. We don't know, so we're better left calling it undetermined.
So you heard her say undetermined. So that conflicts, obviously, with the state's witness who had a different take on Tammy Daybell's death. Very important testimony from both witnesses. So it will be up to the jury to decide, because Chad Daybell, one of the things he's on trial for is the murder of Tammy Daybell.
Yeah, and I think that's the charge he is most concerned about, right? Obviously, he wants to walk, but this is the one, like, you are charged with murdering the mother of your children. Let's bring back in our think tank. Still with us, Darrell Cohen, Meg Strickler, Josh Schiffer. Is there any chance that the jury could potentially find him guilty of murdering the children who were buried in his backyard and not guilty?
You can't.
Or a hung jury on what happened to Tammy?
Do you want to lay bets? I can lay bets.
Yeah.
I mean, you want to play poker on this. There's no way in God's green earth that he's not going to get found guilty of all three.
So it's all or nothing.
But to me, it doesn't matter. If he's convicted,
it does matter.
No,
It does matter.
He's convicted of one. He goes bye-bye. He may go bye-bye with a needle.
ya.
It matters not.
The issue is, can it? Yes. Don't put anything past a jury. Juries can do lots of things. Very often, it don't make any
It's
sense.
the strongest defense case, and I know none of them are strong, okay? But of the three murders, is the strongest defense the murder of Tammy
Yeah.
or of the children?
It is of Tammy. I will give you that. That of the three horrible stories we have here, the least of it is Tammy. But I am convinced that when you look at this in totality, the jury is going to find the correct guilty verdict.
But that's exactly what the defense is trying to do, is cleave these two apart. You've got the kids and you've got Tammy. And what we just watched were two highly paid, super special experts that the judges said, trust them, they're experts.
Yeah, but the one expert just said it was undetermined. She still died.
But that's exactly it.
The difference here
Beyond
is
a reasonable doubt means that expert said, I can't tell you if this was murder or not.
But they're not going to listen to that expert.
Are you bothered at all by the state's expert, the way she came to her conclusion? Like, it wasn't this, it wasn't this, it wasn't this, so it had to be this.
I am bothered by that. I do think that is a little bit of incompetence on that side, 100%. And that if it had been a trial just on that storyline, there is definitely
Could be a
some
problem,
issue.
but there's so much else.
If the penultimate issue was what's the cause of death, there's no way this is close to beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's the big issue, because without this death certificate and cause of death, it's either a homicide or it's not.
But either
and that's
way,
the important part.
It doesn't matter.
I get it. It
In my
just
view,
doesn't
he
matter.
is going to be convicted at least of two, maybe 2 out of 3. In baseball, he'd be hitting a home run. Here, he's digging his own grave.
Let's bring back in Kelly Craft in Boise. Kelly, what's the next big moment we're going to look at tonight?
Vinny, the next thing that we wanted to talk about is the testimony of Chad Daybell's children, the children that belong to him and Tammy. And so Emma Murray, she took the stand first, and she really just came across as very shy, and she talked about being shy, and also really was just kind of in a way appearing that she was taking responsibility for anything that was brought to light in the state's case negative about her father. She talked about her mother Tammy's health, saying that those bruises on Tammy Daybell's arms, well, she would get bruises just from carrying groceries. She talked about her mother being so tired she'd come home from work right after school because they worked together. Her mother was a librarian at the school, and that she would go right to bed some nights. Let's listen to some of Emma's testimony.
Your dad ever talked to you about death percentages?
Yes.
Did your dad ever talk to you about people being close to death?
Yes.
Do you recall any specific people your dad talked to you about being close to death?
Yes.
And who was that?
Well, my mom was one of the people, but it was not death so much as how connected your spirit was to your body. My mom would feel lightheaded and say she didn't feel quite connected to herself, and they would reconnect her spirit to her body.
When your dad would talk to you about castings, did he explain to you anything about the body having to die?
No.
Explain anything to you about the body having to be destroyed?
No.
And again, didn't talk to you about zombies?
No.
And also Garth Daybell, he took the stand, and he said things along the same lines as his sister Emma, saying that his mother would be extremely tired, that she would have fainting spells. He also recalled that night when he was at home, he said that he was watching YouTube videos up until about 3 o'clock in the morning, but prior he had walked past his parents' bedroom, saw them lying in bed together. Then he heard a thump, and his father asked him to come in and help with his mother. Let's listen to some of that testimony.
And then when you walked into your parents' bedroom, what exactly did you observe?
I observed my mother had rolled partially out of bed with her legs entangled in the sheets. And my instinct was, oh, she needs help. So I immediately grabbed her by the shoulders and lifted her up back into the bed.
Okay. And at that point, you felt her arms were cold?
Yeah, I felt she was cold and stiff, and
okay.
And she was gray, and I realized she's not been breathing.
Okay. Okay. And at some point between the time you got home at 1 o'clock and the time you went to sleep at about 3 o'clock, did you hear anything or any indication that there was any kind of sound or struggle?
I heard nothing.
And Garth was asked by the state if he had changed his story a few times. One thing in particular about saying to some people that he had found his mother on the couch. He said, no, I never said that. So he pretty much stuck to whatever he was planning on testifying to. Vinny.
All right, let's bring back in our think tank. The kids are all in. They do not believe it. They're actually trying to help dad here. Does that move a juror?
No, it does not. What it does is it tells me that there are two living victims. The dad are deceased and they're the victims. These two kids don't want to lose their dad, and they are looking, in my view, the other way and ignoring the real evidence because he's my dad.
They're in denial. They grew up with that cuckoo-ness. And so the fact that he's talking about going to his mother and she's gray, did you call 911? Where's the panic? Where's the emotion there? I understand why there's not emotion. Perhaps is still in shock all this time later, and it's very difficult to speak about. But he comes from a dysfunctional world, and the two of them look like they're still singing that dysfunctional song. I didn't think it helped anything.
Yeah, if it helped anybody, it was the state. Because
in what way?
Because everybody sat and gave very appropriate attention and took these two deeply traumatized young people very seriously, treated them very, very well, gave them a lot of attention. And then as soon as they were out of the room, I imagine everybody that watched that testimony glanced at someone next to them with big expressions on their face because what they just listened to was insane. Well, nuts. Oh, my sibling is closer to death, according to. Are you kidding? It's got to terrify some of these jurors that Chad Daybell and Lori are walking out there.
It makes him look like they're part of his cult.
Absolutely.
Yes,
In a way they are.
Yes.
Because that's where they grew up. That was their world. That was the whole expanse of their world. It wasn't out here. It was here. And this is what they learned. This is what they knew. And this is what they're having to deal with. And my heart breaks for these two kids, regardless of whether they realize we should or not.
Yeah,
absolutely.
This was not an act.
No,
Chad Daybell wasn't pulling a trick and then going back home and giggling about it with the other people in on it. No, this was true belief. Look at those kids.
True believers. Up next.
We're not done looking at the most compelling testimony and moments from the Doomsday Prophet's death penalty triple murder trial. We'll take a look at more moments like this.
Are they seizing stuff again?
By 2050, there will be more plastic than fish in the oceans. There are
Welcome back. The trial of the so-called Doomsday Prophet Chad Daybell is winding down in Boise, Idaho. We're getting close to the end. So tonight we're taking a look at all the big moments from this case. Kelly Craft still with us in Boise where it's all happening. Kelly, what's the next big moment you have tonight?
Vinny, we thought this next moment was a really big one because it's the jailhouse phone calls between Chad and Lori. So keep in mind, Lori is sitting behind bars. The children have not been found yet. So she's behind bars. This is about February 20th, 2020. She was arrested on child endangerment charges. And Chad Daybell, he's free as a bird. He's at home and they're conversing. Lori's in jail. They're talking 10 to 12 times a day. And one phone call in particular caught the attention of Detective Hermosillo. And what did they talk about during this jailhouse phone call? Well, a project that was taking place on Chad Daybell's property. So throughout this phone call, you can hear Chad giggling. Lori's asking Chad for reassurance that the project is going forward, that everything is in going as planned. She asks about a 3% trouble ratio, saying at the beginning of this whole project, we thought it was only a 3% chance that there was going to be in trouble with this plan. But now it seems there's a 100% chance. Why don't we go ahead and listen to some of these phone calls?
I asked him what we talked about. He's very optimistic.
It was very optimistic for you, or he's very optimistic it could happen?
He's very optimistic. For both of us.
He doesn't know his own project timeline.
He said, stick with it.
And the people are like 3 months out. Like,
I mean,
when they estimated they'd have it done, and they're like, well, we had so many problems. We couldn't get to the backyard. We had to pull a crane over the house to get these huge rocks for the waterfall.
it's just a weird situation, but you're exactly right. Yeah, it takes forever.
Yeah, there's always something comes up. Well, we didn't know when we dug in your backyard, we were going to find whatever.
You just are spectacular, and the Lord is going to use those talents. You're on earth at this time for that purpose.
So you hear throughout that phone call, Chad Daybell reassuring Lori that everything's going to be okay. It was that very phone call that prompted investigators to search Chad Daybell's property the very next day. And what did they find? The remains of JJ and Tylee.
Unbelievable call. I mean, their demeanor is just like they don't have a worry in the world. Unbelievable. Let's bring our think tank still with us. Daryl Cohen, Meg Strickler, Josh Schiffer. It's amazing. This is one day before their entire world's come crumbling down, and it turns into murder charges, murder case. Chad gets locked up, but here they're like oblivious to what is going on and what's about to happen.
I think this was, for me, the highlight of the entire trial because you really got insight into them. It's like they're unveiled, and you get to hear them speaking, and they're giggling, and they're absolutely evil laugh. I took it as.
They thought they were going to get away with this.
Exactly.
And it's the exclamation point when the state's making the ultimate punishment argument, because that's really what it's going to come down to, are using these individual pieces of evidence when the fulcrum is ready for the big ask. And at some point towards the end of this case, the state's going to be making the biggest ask. And they're going to need to punctuate it with pieces of information like this, where literally they are joking and laughing about the dead children in the yard. Now, listen, I tell some terrible jokes. I don't know about that, man.
Yeah.
And they know people are listening. Sorry, Daryl.
No, it's good. I'm just thinking that we can do what we want. This is just a soap opera for us. Who cares? A little piece here, a little piece there. They'll never get us until they did.
Yep, exactly.
Cruel indifference. The shocking, the conscious.
It's slamming the podium when they do it. That's what they're going to say in their closing for the death penalty.
Oh, you know
yes,
the emotional setup for that summation.
Yes.
They're well armed. They got lots of material.
They deserve one thing. He deserves one thing, to be buried by the very shovel that he used to bury those kids.
I agree.
I heard it for the first, we heard it for the first time in this trial. We hadn't heard it before, and it floored us because we had heard the call on the day they were digging it up, and their demeanor's down here because they realize what's about to happen, but they're just like giggling, laughing. Not a good look, not a good sound. Let's go back out to Kelly Craft in Boise. And what have you got in store for our final big moment from this case tonight?
Vinny, the last thing that we want to talk about tonight is that steamy romance novel, if you will, that Chad Daybell was writing to Lori. And so what he's doing is he's sending her a series of texts in which he's telling her about the first moment that they met, and that when he touched her hand, he felt a shock. So our very own Cody Thomas is going to read
All right, please. Here's all present accounted for, Your Honor.
Thank you. Please be seated. Okay, we're back on the record after the morning recess. CR 2221-1623, State of Idaho versus Chad Guy Daybell. The state is continuing with a rebuttal. If the state has another witness to call at this time, you may.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state will call Lieutenant Hermosillo.
Very well.
You solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Just a little bit. Okay. Thank you. All right, before we inquire on direct, then I'll note the witness, Lieutenant Hermosillo, has been sworn. Lieutenant, have you observed or watched any trial testimony since you were last here?
No, Your Honor.
Have you talked to anybody else about the testimony they've given in trial?
No, Your Honor.
All right, thanks for your responses, Ms. Blake. If you'd like to inquire, you may.
Thank you. Lieutenant Hermosillo, can you remind the jurors where you work?
Rexburg Police Department.
And did you begin work on a case involving two missing children, specifically JJ Vallow and Tylee Ryan?
Yes, I did.
Do you recall when you became involved in that investigation?
When we started looking for JJ, that was November 26th, 2019, when we performed the welfare check.
And were you involved in the beginning of Idaho's involvement into the whereabouts of JJ Vallow?
Yes.
Do you recall when the bodies of the children were recovered?
June 9th, 2020.
And where were they recovered?
Chad Daybell's backyard.
During the investigation, did you learn who Emma Daybell or Emma Murray is?
We did.
And who is she?
The daughter of Chad Daybell.
Lieutenant Hermosillo, did you ever see Emma Murray at the gym?
I did one time early on in the investigation, yes.
And when you say early on in the investigation, would it have been before the discovery of the children?
It was.
When you saw her at the gym, did you approach her?
No.
Did you talk to her?
No.
Did you ask her questions?
No.
Did you go and work out by her?
No.
Have you ever driven by the Daybell property?
I have, yes.
Did you drive by it as part of this investigation?
Yes, I did.
Do you have other reasons that you would sometimes drive by that property?
We have, well, I have several reasons. We have our dry cleaning business that's a quarter-mile down the road from the Daybell residence. I also have family that lives north of the Daybell residence. But most importantly, I think the reason I was driving by the Daybell residence was it was a very active investigation at that time.
Did that include driving by prior to the children being located?
I'm sorry, could you say that one more time?
Did you drive by prior to the location of the children's bodies?
Yes.
And did you drive by sometimes after?
Yes.
Did you drive by 2 times a week?
No.
And again, when we talk about driving by that property, you said that was a significant piece of the investigation?
It was.
And can you remind us what was found on that property?
JJ, Vallow, and Tylee Bryan.
Do you know when Tammy died, where she was located?
I do.
Where was that?
Chad Daybell's bedroom.
So all three at the Daybell property or in the residence?
Correct.
I have no further questions.
All right, thank you, Ms. Blake. Any cross-examination, Mr. Pryor?
No questions.
All right, that will conclude the testimony then of Lieutenant Hermosillo. You may go ahead and step down. Thank you. All right, as I mentioned, this is the state's rebuttal evidence. At this time, I'm going to inquire, does the state have another witness to call?
The state does not, Your Honor.
All right, so that concludes rebuttal. That will bring us to the next stage of these proceedings then, ladies and gentlemen. The next matter the court will be taking up are the jury instructions in this case. I'll note we are taking time to work on those and have been working on them. I'll address more on the record with counsel in a formal jury instruction conference. We are going to be conducting the closing arguments in this matter, as I understand it, tomorrow. The state will have closing mid-morning. Is that the schedule the state still wishes to have for the closing argument, Ms. Blake?
That will work for the state, Your Honor.
All
Thank
right.
you.
And does that work for the defense as well?
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you.
Okay. Well, we're going to have some matters to work on then between now and then administratively. That's going to allow the jurors to be excused for the day. They'll be returning again tomorrow. We'll take up other matters both on and off the record as we prepare for getting final instructions to the jurors before they would begin deliberations and to have for the closing arguments. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, again, thank you for your attendance this morning. You're going to recess to the jury room with some additional instructions before you're excused for the day. Please follow that continuing instruction of the court not to discuss the case amongst yourselves or with anyone else until you begin your deliberations. And please don't do anything to research or look the case up between now and then. That will conclude our juror service for today, and we'll return again tomorrow for closings. All please rise for the jurors. Council, there's again going to be a jury instruction conference on the record. I'd if possible like to take that up later this afternoon. We'll do an informal jury instruction conference off the record to determine whether or not the parties have reviewed our proposed instructions that have been submitted and determine where there might be objections that can be considered by the court. In addition, we're going to discuss exhibits as well and make sure there's a clear record of what's been admitted in this lengthy trial to confirm that with counsel before exhibits are submitted to the jury in their deliberations. So if counsel will stick around, we'll go ahead and recess for the day. At this time on the record, we may come back on the record at such later point, subject to when we get to these issues that could be called back on the record. So we'll go ahead and have the public excused at this point, and I'll talk to counsel about timing going into the afternoon and tomorrow, please.
we aren't necessarily watching the jury conference. Yeah, I'm really glad that they brought up that Hermosillo had a dry cleaning business a quarter of a mile from the Daybell house and family living in the neighborhood. Yeah, no kidding, Badger. Wow. Okay. Well, I certainly wasn't expecting that. I thought we were going to hear from Emma, but no. Oh, Cross Stitch Mama says, boo, no jail calls between Emma and Chad. Okay. Let me just taking another look at Twitter here real quick. Okay. Southern Beach Girl is asking why did they recall Hermosillo? Okay. Well, get your goodies tomorrow so that we can do a verdict watch, and I don't know. It's possible they might have a verdict and I can still go to my doctor appointment, but I think I'll probably reschedule. They may take more time, but you never know. I was watching a video where they're talking about some case, and they took like 18 minutes to come back with a verdict because they were so convinced. Well, I think we're probably done for the day. If I understand what the judge said, we could replay what he said exactly again and make sure that my feeling is correct there. Let's see.
Closing mid-morning, is that? All right, as I mentioned, this is the state's rebuttal evidence at this time. I'm going to inquire, does the state have another witness to call?
The state does not, Your Honor.
All right, so that concludes rebuttal. That will bring us to the next stage of these proceedings then, ladies and gentlemen. The next matter the court we'll be taking up are the jury instructions in this case. I'll note we are taking time to work on those and have been working on them. I'll address more on the record with counsel in a formal jury instruction conference. We are going to be conducting the closing arguments in this matter, as I understand it, tomorrow. The state will have closing mid-morning. Is that the schedule the state still wishes to have for the closing argument, Ms. Blake?
That will work for the state, Your Honor. Thank
All right.
you.
And does that work for the defense as well?
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you.
Okay. Well, we're going to have some matters to work on then between now and then administratively. That's going to allow the jurors to be excused for the day. They'll be returning again tomorrow. We'll take up other matters both on and off the record as we prepare for getting final instructions to the jurors before they would begin deliberations and to have for the closing arguments. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, again, thank you for your attendance this morning. You're going to recess to the jury room with some additional instructions before you're excused for the day. Please follow that continuing instruction of the court not to discuss the case amongst yourselves or with anyone else until you begin your deliberations. And please don't do anything to research or look the case up between now and then. That will conclude our juror service for today, and we'll return again tomorrow for closings. All please rise for the jurors.
I just want to hear his words here and then get your opinions on, I'm kind of feeling inclined to leave the stream or to end the stream, and if they come back on the record, do a short review of what Judge Boyce has to say there.
All right, thank you. Please be seated. Counsel, there's again going to be a jury instruction conference on the record. I'd, if possible, like to take that up later this afternoon. We'll do an informal jury instruction conference off the record to determine whether or not the parties have reviewed our proposed instructions that have been submitted and determine where there might be objections that can be considered by the court. In addition, we're going to discuss exhibits as well and make sure there's a clear record of what's been admitted in this lengthy trial to confirm that with counsel before exhibits are submitted to the jury and their this time on the record. We may come back on the record at such later point, subject to when we get to these issues that could be called back on the record. So we'll go ahead and have the public excused at this point, and I'll talk to counsel about timing going into the afternoon and tomorrow, please.
Okay, yeah. Rather than killing time for what may be a nothing. Okay, they just ended the stream, so they felt the same as I did. Okay, well, with that, we will leave this and come back tomorrow, and everybody have lots of popcorn, lots of snacks for verdict watch, because it's going to be good. So we'll see you tomorrow, and until then, have a great well, it's not even afternoon yet, so the rest of your day. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.